Okay, so let's work with some page records, specifically page records that are zoned. We'll discuss unzoned page records at the end of this video. And in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark a few zones on a few pages of a few documents for redaction. So let me locate a document. And here are the pages of the document. This happens to be only a 2-page document. And what I'm going to do when I'm marking zones, I first want to make sure that my current tool is the zoning tool. Only one of these 3 tools may be active at one time or at any particular time. Normally it's the zoning tool that you would have active, and it will remain active until you activate a different tool. So suppose that we want to redact this name. All I did was drag an area over the zone I'd like to redact, and you'll see by default SUPERText has put a caption here called irrelevant. We'll see later where these come from, but I can easily change it. I changed that to informer because in this particular example we have 4 privilege or 4 redaction types that we wish to track. One is areas of documents that are clearly irrelevant. 2, zones that are have to do with confidential police sources, which is this particular example I just zoned. 3, zones that deal with police investigative techniques. And 4, zones that mark any kind of privilege information. So here I have that zone. Now working again with the document, let me just scroll over a little bit, and suppose this phone number is irrelevant. So you see there's a default zone, which we'll see in a minute. It marked it as irrelevant. And let's go further down the page. Suppose these costs are kind of proprietary and we don't want to disclose them, so I'll mark those as irrelevant. So I can mark as many zones as I wish on one or more of the pages of the current document. So in SUPERText we work with one document at a time when it comes to creating new zones or editing existing zones. See, if I go to the next page of this document and then I go back to the page, you'll see that these zones are currently here. Notice that the zones, and let me zoom up a little bit so you can see, the zones appear with a red caption with an asterisk to the left. And what that means is that these zones are currently pending. They have not yet been saved to the SUPERText database. I can choose to act on them or do something with them now if I wish without saving them, but normally you would save them, and we'll see how to do that in a minute. Now on the next page, this also is the name of a source or informer, so I will change that zone type. So I have marked over here 4 zones, and to save them is really quite simple. There's a simple way and there's a more involved way if we want to add information to the zones. But quite simply, to save the zones, I click on this tool, Commit Pending Zones, and you'll see that now the captions, let me zoom up a little bit, are in blue and is no longer an asterisk beside them. So this means that the zones now have been saved in your SUPERText project. They are no longer temporary. If I ever go to a different document and then come back to the document in question, you'll see that the zones come back as we would expect. So what if we've saved some zones and we wish to change some zones? Suppose we want to delete some zones, or we want to perhaps change the size of some zones or change the type of the zone. These are all really quite simple operations. Again, you need to make sure that the zoning tool is your active tool. Let me just temporarily make this a little bit wider. So for example, when the zoning tool is the active tool, which it usually will be, clicking on a zone gives you these selection handles, so I can make the zone bigger or smaller. And the moment that I make a change, you'll notice that the zone caption has returned or has changed to red with a leading asterisk, indicating that there's some zones that need to be saved again because we've made some changes. I can add some further zones. I can also delete a zone. There is a shortcut, and you'll see where we define all of these, but I can easily use a keyboard shortcut to delete the zone. Or in fact, I can recreate the zone or create a new zone. This time we're going to grab the fax number as well, and this will be irrelevant zone. And when I'm ready to save the information, and remember, I can make as many changes, additions, or deletions on one or more of the pages of the current document. I don't have to save right away. I can choose when to save the zone information just by clicking on that tool. And now you'll see that these have gone to blue captions, which is telling me that these zones are now in the SUPERText project. So where did these zone types come from? We'll see that in a minute. I'd like to show you what's under Zone Options. Under Zone Options, we see the zones that are currently defined in the Types tab. We'll see how to define these in a few minutes, or it may be that your SUPERText administrator has defined the zones for you to use already. But in any event, in my particular example, I have looks like about 5 zone types. Because these zones are used to mark redaction, I chose to identify them all as R-something, such as R-informer, R-irrelevant. That's just a convention I like to use. Because remember, in SUPERText, zones can do a lot more than just identify areas to redact, and we'll see that later in this video. With each zone type, we have some default options. We can select what's called default rendering. This is a setting that tells SUPERText how by default to handle this zone when it needs to be rendered. That is, when it needs to be acted on in, for example, in a save to PDF operation or in a print operation. So for example, and we'll see more about rendering later, for example, with the informer privilege or the informer redaction zone type, we indicated that we wanted a solid blackout rendering. You see, I could have selected some other rendering options. I double click to change the rendering or the properties of this zone. You see, I could select do not render, I could select solid whiteout, and all these other ones. We'll see these later in the video, but I'm going to leave it at the default now. We also have a default zone color, and zone color is not only the color that appears in the SUPERText view window for that zone type, it's also the color that would render if you picked one of the color zone rendering options that we'll see later. This is very important. You can assign hotkeys to zone types, and this makes it very easy to change a zone type. And that's how at the beginning of this video I was able to mark zones and change them very quickly. You'll see that in a moment. And finally, in the Types tab, one zone, and only one, is defined as the default zone type. And this will be the zone that gets created whenever you mark a new zone. It'll be created with that type because SUPERText doesn't yet know what kind of zone type you wish. We'll see that again in a minute. In the Operations tab, there's some other shortcuts that you can see and some other options, which we'll see a bit later. Note that Control plus Delete deletes the active zone. It's just a shortcut. And Control Shift Delete deletes all zones on the page. It's just a shortcut. In addition to these shortcuts, and I encourage you to learn these shortcuts and to assign zone hotkeys to make your work as efficient as possible. In addition to the zone hotkeys and other shortcuts that you see under the Zone Options menu, you can always click on a zone to make it active and then right-click to show a context menu, and you'll see under the Active Zone item there's various menu items available to delete the zone, for example, change its type or color, to zone the whole page, or delete all zones on the page. So the context menu is available to you at any time if you need it. But as I say, it's much better to, especially if you do a lot of zoning, to learn the options and the shortcut keys that you've assigned, because you have control over these. So another example is a Control W will zone the whole page, which we'll see in a minute. But let's take a look at these keys again. I assign Control F1 to the zone type that I do the most, which is the irrelevant zone, and then Control F2 for informant, and Control F3 for police. So here's how that works. When I mark a zone, a new zone, it's going to be the default type, which is irrelevant in this case. But if I do the Control F2 keyboard sequence, it changes to informer, Control F3, police, and so forth. So that is how you can use these hotkeys quite effectively. So let's save these zones, and let's take a look at one other document. We'll do one other hotkey. Suppose this whole page is irrelevant. Instead of marking a zone, which I always can, I can also mark the whole page with the Control W hotkey. Again, under Zone Options, we saw that a Control W will zone the whole page. So if I do a Control W, it automatically creates a zone on the whole page. And of course, I can change its type with the other hotkeys if I wish. Now, in this case, I'm not going to save the zones because I just wanted to show you something, that shortcut. Let me go back to the previous document. Notice what happens. If I'm ever about to lose zone information, SUPERText will give me a warning that I'm about to discard the pending zones, and it'll ask me to confirm that that's really what I want to do. So it wants to know, do I want to save the pending zones? In this case, I'm going to say no, because I don't want to. And what that means, and it's telling me, of course, that the zones were not saved. What that means is if I go to that document, you will see that that second page is not zoned. So SUPERText will give me a warning if I'm about to lose some zone information. And that really means that I forgot to click the commit button over here. You may be wondering where these zone types came from. Where did the zones that show up under options, in my case 5, which happen to be all redaction type zones, where did they come from? Really, the zone types are defined in SUPERText using the template manager. Not likely in your installation, you won't be involved in using the template manager because presumably in most installations a SUPERText administrator would create these templates for you. But in case you are an administrator, or in case you want to know, the template manager in SUPERText lets you create templates to do many things, including to create page records. So for example, take a look at this template, which I've called R Informer. It's for use for page records because zones are examples of page records, as I indicated at the beginning of this video. Similarly, R Irrelevant is a zone type for use as a page record. So the templates that I have defined using the template manager, that I have defined for use for page records, will be automatically the ones that appear as the zone types that you can mark in the SUPERText view window. That's how it works. And if I want to create a new one, I would create a new template. I would assign it a name. The name that I give the template will be the zone name or zone type name, and it will be what appears in the caption of the zone. In fact, you will see later in this video in a few minutes that the name I assigned here is the value that SUPERText puts for that type of record in SUPERText System Field DocRecType. We'll see that in a minute. But if I call this zone, I don't know, other, for example, and suppose it is for use for redaction records, redaction zone, so I decide to use a convention to preface it with r dash other, that would define a new zone type. Oops, I forgot to tell it to use it for page records. And you'll notice that other is on the list, so I'll close this, and you'll notice that now I have other available as a new zone type. I haven't yet assigned it a hotkey, but I could, and if I were using it frequently, I should. Let me get rid of that other. Go to the template manager. I will delete the other, and take a look at what happens when you create a template. When you create a template, SUPERText wants to know what form to use when an entry that uses that template is desired. So forms in SUPERText, of course, are user creatable, so you can expect that your SUPERText administrator has used a form designer to create some forms for you, and there will be a video on form design and using the SUPERText form designer. But for now, just know that when you create a template, you also associate a form to the template, and it may be that the same form is associated for numerous different types of templates, or it may be that different templates use different forms, as would be the case if the information you want to capture for different types of templates differs substantially, so that it would not be reasonable to put them on that information on the same form. Given then that forms can be associated with templates, you might wonder, how do you get to these forms? Let me go back and show you two ways, at least. Let's go back and do a bit of a review while we're at it. I'm going to mark some zones. This we said is irrelevant, so we'll leave it at its default. This we said was informer, so we'll use a hotkey to change it. These prices were confidential. Proprietary, so we'll leave them as irrelevant to any disclosure in the future. And then I believe we have informer over here. So you see, using the hotkeys I can be pretty productive. Okay, and of course I can mark more. So normally when I click the commit pending zones, SUPERText commits to zones but doesn't prompt me for any additional information. The information that gets committed is the oh, there is one more that we missed over here. Let me grab that one too and resize it and change that to informer. The information that gets committed, if I don't do anything different than just click on the tool, will obviously deal with zone color, the size of the zone, the location of the zone, and the type of the zone. But suppose I wanted to associate more information with each particular zone. Then what I would do, and the tooltip tells you that to use, instead of clicking, shift click, or use the menu item zone commit to open the commit zone dialog. So I have two options. I can either go to zone commit, and if I pick it from the menu, I will get an option that I don't get with just a regular click. Or I can shift click, which is the same operation. So if I shift click on this button, I now get the option to collect page records in new window after commit. Notice that SUPERText also gives me information about what happened to this document vis-a-vis zones, and it's telling me in this particular case that I've created some new zones. I've created 3 of them that are designated as R informer and 2 of them designated as R irrelevant. So if I click OK, what SUPERText does now is not only does it commit the zones, so we'll notice now that on the view side all of the zones have blue captions and no longer have an asterisk, but it collects them in a page record window. In this page record window, I see the page number that the zone is located at, and I've configured this page record window to show me the type of zone, which is system field DocRecType. But of course I have options here. I can select different columns. I'll let you play with that. But the most important option available here now is the ability to open up my form. And what will open is the form that the SUPERText administrator has designated as associated with the template of that zone type. We saw that earlier when we looked at the template manager. So this form was designed to capture, well, first of all, to tell me what type of zone it is, and that's a read-only field. That's why it's kind of grayed out. An area, the administrator decided that the form should have an area for me to add notes, an area for me to flag certain things, and if it's an informer, maybe an area to designate who the informer is. This particular form has the informer entry area linked to a key lookup table. That's just something that the administrator decided to design, and there is a video on SUPERText key lookup tables. But that simply means that when I double click, I get a list, a table, and I can select one or more items from this list, which we'll try in a minute. But I want to show you something nifty. If I take a look at the tooltip here, there's an option here to shift click to view to zoom to the zone, or control click to fit in window. So if I shift click, SUPERText zooms the zone up so that now I can make some coded entries using the form and see the zone information very well. So I'm going to add here, we decided we're going to use name codes instead of actual names as another level of protection for informants. I'm going to select this one, and if I wanted details, I can also take a look, and this is an example of a key lookup record in SUPERText. So I'll select that. Indeed, I can select more than one. So if I have an area of a zone that involves more than one informant, I can put two in, or I can go back and I'll just put one in. And now I can go to the next zone, and I can choose to zoom it up. And that was irrelevant, so I don't want to add any information to that. The next zone is an informer one. You see, the previous zone was irrelevant. I don't even want to add any information to it. This one's informer, so it's the same informer. So if I'm not sure, I can actually, as I say, shift click. It's still Mr. Sanders. I can select him again, and I can go to the next one, which is irrelevant. And I can also use the ditto function over here. I'm sorry, this one, ditto field. There we go. That I add dittos to the last value that I used, and then I'm done. So basically what I've done now is, using one of the methods, I have taken the zones that I've just created on the view side, and I've added information to them. And the type of information that I was permitted to add to them was based on the form that was designed for that zone type, and that was associated with that zone type template in the SUPERText Template Manager. Now suppose you want to examine the information in the form that was associated with a particular zone or zones, but you haven't just newly created the zones, because we saw earlier that if we newly create or edit the zones, we have the option from the SUPERText view window to collect all of the zones that we just created and to open up the forms for those zones. But suppose at a later time we want to locate or edit the zones. Well, whenever I do a search in SUPERText for something, if I retrieve a document that has page records or zones on it, it'll show up with a yellow icon. So here I can see that this particular document has one or more zones on it. And there's a tool at the bottom of the search window. Let me just show you here, page records, that will open up the same page records window that we saw earlier from the view side when we committed the zones from there using the shift click on the tool. And we can of course open up the form take a look at the zones, change any data that we wish. SUPERText always shows the zone associated with the form by highlighting it in red. And of course we can zoom, and we can use the other trick I showed you to shift click to zoom the zone as well. So that's another way. There is another way. Because all of the information in the forms or all the information that might have been filled in to the forms associated with one or more zones or page records is searchable in SUPERText, I can take advantage of that information, of course by design. So if I do a field search, and I will search the field DocRecType for R Informer, knowing that, as you saw earlier in the video, the type of zone that's listed here and that is shown in each zone caption is actually stored in a system field in SUPERText called DocRecType. So I simply did a search for DocRecType Informer, or R Informer in this case, and it locates, in this particular case, we see zones. This is zone information because DocRecType R Informer we defined using the template manager as page records or zones in SUPERText. So I can equally open up a form from here and take a look at the information associated with it and move from zone to zone and take a look at the data or change it. Now notice that we only retrieved 7. Of course you might have a lot more. This is just a small example. But suppose we have a lot and we only are interested in the ones where we use the name X-ray in the form when we filled in the information about the informer. So now we get R4. And now, for example, if we now choose to release the information that was previously zoned for redaction for R Informer for Sanders, who's coded as X-ray, then we can do so. Now there's two ways of doing so. There's a quick and dirty way, and then there's a better way that's more disciplined that I would recommend. Let's take a look at the quick and dirty way. If I have the viewer locked over here, then whenever I click on a zone, it will show to me in red no matter what document it's in. So the quick and dirty way is whenever I see a zone, I simply click it on the view side, Control Delete, it's gone, I save it, I commit to zone. But I don't want to do that because I want to show you a better way. So I won't save that. So here's the more disciplined way. The more disciplined way, and you'll notice over here that one of the zone types I defined is release. And that seems a little bit unusual that I have a redaction type called release, but I defined it and created it specifically to track redactions that were once there that we no longer need, but to do so in a disciplined way. Here's how I'm going to use it. Again, if I lock the viewer here, I can either open the form. Actually, I will open the form this time, and it shows me the zone in red. I will change its type, so Control F12 to a release. Save that over there. I still will know that it was previously X-ray Informer because that data is still in the form, but I may want to put a note here. Release per instructions of J. Smith, June 1. There we go. And I'll go to the next R Informer that was X-ray. And I will click, change it to a release using my hotkey, save it. I don't want to repeat all that typing, so I can use Control D, which is a shortcut for ditto field. Next, Control F12 and Control D, and so forth. And basically what that'll do is it'll change the record type of these other ones from our informer or informant, whatever it was, to release, so that next time we are working with an operation that requires a redaction, it will know, or will tell it, that our release are not redactions. As a matter of fact, if you look at the zone options that I set up for our release, I didn't do that. I should have said that the default rendering is do not render, because those really are not redactions at all. Now, if you have 20,000 of these informer zones for X-ray, for example, and you don't want to go through this interactive process, there is an advantage that the interactive process you get to double check and take a look at the highlighted zone to make sure it is what you want. But if you're confident with your initial data entry and you want to take these 20,000 and change them all in one operation, there is a way to do that as well. So I won't cover it in this video, but there is an advanced operation that will enable you to do that. Really, in SUPERText, whenever you find that there is something that's repetitive, there's usually a batch operation available to greatly optimize how you do that. I mentioned earlier in a video that when we are working with page records, including zone page records, we work in what's called document mode. We work with one document at a time. So if I were to locate and work with some documents, you'll notice that when I put a document in the view window, it is in document mode. So take a look down here. It's telling you what mode the viewer is in. In fact, you in your work may not have noticed anything other than document mode, because most of the time most users just work in document mode. If I go to the next document, this one happens to have page records, I'm in document mode. But it is possible to have the viewer in what's called list mode. And one way to do that, and I cover this in another video, is to do a queue from table operation. So if I take the 194 documents in this particular table, I can send them all to the viewer. Let me start them at page 2. And now the viewer, although it's still in document mode, it does give us the ability to open the 390 pages we've just queued. And if we do, you'll see over here we're looking at page 1 of 390, and you see the viewer is in what's called list mode. Now there is another video that discusses queues and other items of SUPERText view window. I just want to point out that in this mode you are looking not at one document, but, well, in this particular example, all the pages of 194 documents. So I can go to page 205, for example, and take a look at this page. In this mode, let me pick another nicer page to look at. In this mode, the page records are not there. We're just looking at the raw images that we've queued. So in list mode, although you can mark zones in list mode, they cannot be saved because they don't belong to one particular document. You're not in document mode. The only reason we enable you to mark zones in this mode is if you want to temporarily put them on, so they're not going to be saved, just for an operation, which we'll see in a minute that we can do. For example, we can print the document with the zones rendered, or save it as PDF with the zones rendered. So keep in mind, you should always be, almost all the time, you should be in document mode when you're working with page records and zone page records. I do want to point out, however, that even when you are in list mode, there is a way to act on the page records or zones that you've already created, and that involves the use of what are called alternate images. And there is a video that discusses alternate images in SUPERText. I will just point it out right now so you're aware of it. So I'm in list mode. I'm looking at 390 pages of the pages that came from various documents. If I go to the zone menu and I log into what's called the TI2 redacted images, these are the alternate images in SUPERText. So if I'm logged into those images, as shown by the check mark, I'm currently logged in, then any action I do now, even on this entire batch in list mode, will use the alternate images, which in this case contain the redactions and page records that we've already created. So that's a little bit of a qualification, but we'll go back now to the general proviso that when you're usually working with page records and zones, you'll be working in document mode. There are many things we can do with zones in SUPERText. For example, in the SUPERText Basic Pack video, you'll see that when you do a disclosure, you can act on those zones and make sure that they're rendered or blacked out or rendered however you want in a disclosure. In addition, you can do some stuff when you print documents in SUPERText, which I'll show you in a minute, and when you save them as PDF, which I'll show you in a minute. We also have a product called PDF Export Pack, which will take the whatever documents you want from a project and in a batch mode, render them to PDF, and that those too can include rendering of any zones that you've created. You can do a linkage analysis and other things with zones as well. So let's take a look at what we can do with the view side. I've got a couple of different types of zones on this document. I've got irrelevant, and I've got a few informer zones. So when I go to print a document, or when I go to print whatever I'm looking at in SUPERText View, one of the tabs here is zones, and if I click on zones, it'll show me what zones currently exist on this particular document. So there can be 0 to whatever, but only only by type. So if I have 17 informer zones, I'll only see one listing for it here. And the rendering. So the rendering is the default rendering, and that comes from, quite simply, here. I said informer should have a default rendering of blackout, irrelevant a default rendering of whiteout. So if I go to print this document and I don't change anything, the zones will be rendered per the defaults. Now I will print to a XPS document writer so that you can see the result of the printout, and I'll call this sample 1. So there's the printout. Let's take a look at it. So we see that the zones have been rendered whiteout for the irrelevant zone, blackout for the informer, whiteout over here, and I think on the other page we had a blackout. When I go to print, I can change the default rendering. Suppose for this particular printout, what I would like is, instead of a solid blackout, I would like a transparent zone color rendering. So SUPERText gives you a little preview of what it'll look like. So you see, transparent means you can see the data under the zone, so this is dangerous. And here it shows you its zone coloring. And I'll set that for all the zones. Okay, so whenever a printout will result in zone rendering that is not a real redaction, SUPERText will boldface this in the list so you're aware of it. Let's see what that looks like. Sample 2, and let's open up sample 2. And you see that the green were the irrelevant zones. Let me zoom that up a bit. And the red was the informer. So if we always wanted to print like that for the next little while, so for example, if we were printing some proofs for somebody else to check, then we can temporarily change the default zone rendering over here, and then we wouldn't have to go each time and change it when we go print. I can also act on these zones when I ask SUPERText View to save a document in PDF, and I can do that one of two ways. This button, the Instant PDF, and there is another video on PDF output in SUPERText, but this one will always use the default rendering. So if I do that, I click on that button, and there I get a PDF version of this document with the blackout zones, the whiteout zones, which of course we can't see, the blackout. But if I want to intercept the PDF process and control it a bit, instead I can select File, Save as PDF, or like many operations in SUPERText, control click on the button instead of clicking on it, and I'll tell it to change the default rendering. And again, just in this example, I'm going to say transparent zone color. So now you'll see that my PDF has the zones in transparent zone color. So the color of the zone indicates what type it is, but these are not true redactions. Now there's a nice chart in the release notes that shows you examples of the different rendering types. And here it is over here. So these are the types that we can define for each zone type for rendering. So solid blackout means that on the printout or the PDF, it'll be blacked out and the data underneath will not be visible. Solid whiteout, whited out with no data visible, true redactions. This one is not a true redaction. Transparent shaded will create a gray shaded zone around a redaction, but you'll be able to see through it. And this one that we call transparent box diagonal, not a true redaction either, but identifies the zone. Transparent zone color, we saw an example of that. So here the date is got a yellow color, and then there's also an option for solid zone color, which will tell you that it was redacted. You will not be able to see the redaction, but it'll be solid. So it'll be a true redaction, but it will indicate why it was a redaction. Let's try that one out, and then we'll wrap up this part of the video. So if I go to save as PDF, I'm sorry, if I go to zones and tell it that I want a solid zone color for all types. Of course, you can set different types for different zones. Notice it's not bold-faced, means these are safe redactions. Okay, yeah. There we go. So this is another example of the zone rendering. We see the zones in true redactions, and the color indicates what type it is or what the justification is for the zone. So SUPERText can do what's called differential zone rendering, and it's important to keep in mind that zones are just records in SUPERText, and like all other records in SUPERText, they have data, they have fields, they're searchable. You can put them in reports, you can tabulate them, but because they're zoned records, you can also act on them a little bit differently when it comes time to print, say, output to PDF, or disclose. So far we have seen how to use zoned page records to handle redactions, but certainly page records are not limited to redactions in SUPERText. Let me give you some other ideas of how you can use page records. For example, you'll notice that I have a new page record type over here that I call event. And because I'm going to be marking many events over the next, let's say, hour or two of using research, I decided to make that my default type, because I can change my default anytime I like. So let me do a search. I'm going to search for something relevant for my task, and I'm using the SUPERText phone number search. I've located some phone numbers of relevance, and I'll go to the original document. Now remember, when you're using and marking zoned page records, you can of course zoom in and zoom out using the various zooming tools or the mouse wheel. And I see over here that there was a call to that phone number. So what I'm going to do is mark a page record over here. In this case, the page record is not a redaction, it's an event. And I see also on page 5 there's another call to that number, and here it is over here. So I will mark it as well. So basically I've marked 2 event records, and there's no more event records for this document. Page records, we can have many page records for a given document. So there is a many-to-one relationship between page records and documents. And we'll see what that means in a minute. But for now, let's just finish through this example. And I will ask to collect the page records in a window so that I can add some data. So now if I double click over here, or if I use the form tool, I will get this form. Now how did we get this form? Again, with the SUPERText Template Manager, the SUPERText administrator has defined an event type, an event record, and that has been associated with the form Acme 2016 event in my example. And this is a simple form that lets me enter a date, maybe cross-link this event to subjects, and maybe enter some analysis. Of course, you can do anything you like in forms that you create. But let's see how this works. So I will use a shift click over here. I see the event, and looks like the date is well, there it is, 10/12. So that's October 12, 2001. And I can cross-link a couple of events, a couple of subjects if I want, or one subject. It's up to me. And I can enter some analysis. So in this case, the analysis is also linked to a monikers list. So I can pick some topics and enter some information. 10-minute call made. And I'll go down to the next event that we marked on this particular document. Let's take a look at it. And it looks like it's the 24th. So I will use the ditto all, and I'll change that to 24. And I could have the same topic or different topics. I'll keep it the same so I don't have to type too much, and I'll finish that. So I have linked 2 event page records to a particular document, and I can of course look through other search results and do other research in my project. Let me just show you one other example. And suppose now that this is relevant, I'll mark it, and I'll ask to get the form rather than just save it. Collect the page records. So I've created one new event, and I will say something about this date. And this time, maybe this is the topic that this is relevant to, and I can make some commentary here. So I'm able to add one or more of these event records that I created as page records to one or more pages in a given document. Now suppose I have an event that we don't have a document for. Maybe somebody tells us something that we want to track. Maybe it's a phone call of some kind that we don't have a record for. Well, I can also enter a new event record, and this won't be linked to any particular document. Why am I able to do this? Because in a template manager, when I define event record, not only did I specify what form that record is to use, but I also specified that in addition to using it for page records, I can use it for new document records. So these records, these event records, of course, are data in SUPERText. They're searchable. You can tabulate them. You can make a report of them. Let me show you an example. Because they're event records that we defined with a template, the search DocRecType event will locate the event records. There's only 3, and I can do all sorts of analysis and output based on these records, and they're all going to be sourced on evidence. So if I open this particular record up, it'll show me the document that it belongs to. Now, if you were a user of SUPERText before version 7, you might be familiar with this way of doing page records, and I want to explain to you what's changed in SUPERText 7. Previous to SUPERText 7, in order to create page records, you had to locate the document and then open the page records window and then click new page record. In SUPERText 7, we have reversed the order so that you first zone the record, as we have seen in the view window, and then you initiate the action from the view window. If you select the mechanism that I just showed you, which was the mechanism used in pre-version 7, then SUPERText will create an unzoned page record. And in fact, this is the only way in SUPERText 7 to end up with a page record that is not associated with a particular zone. So this page record would be associated with a page or a range of pages, but not any particular zone. There are some very specific and unique use for this kind of record, but for most users, 99% of the users, generally you're going to want to create zoned page records only, so you will want to initiate the action, as we have seen before, by highlighting a zone here and either clicking on the commit or shift clicking in order to commit and then see a form. One last thought: sometimes what you may want to do is just apply some temporary zones for some immediate purpose. Let me locate a document, and suppose somebody or you want to give somebody a copy of this document, but you wanted some areas on his copy to be zoned out, to be not visible. So I'll go into zone options, and you'll notice I've created one zone type called temporary. So what I'll do is I'll make that the default for now, and suppose we can give them everything on this page is okay, but suppose the price shown over here I really don't want to give, and suppose this commentary here I don't want to give, and I see the price is also over here. I don't want to give that. So now, for example, if I save this as a PDF, so control click to open a dialog first of all, it tells me that I have unsaved temporary zones. You'll see the asterisk, that means they're unsaved, so they have not yet been committed with this tool over here. But I don't want to commit them. I only want to produce a PDF with those areas. In my example, I'm going to change from blackout to whited out so that the recipient of that PDF does not see those areas. Quick and dirty way to do that: here's the PDF, and I think on page 2 we should see no price. There we go, that's been and then on this page we should see that comment that's gone, and the price is gone over there. Just an idea of another way you can use zoned page records. And at this point, I wouldn't want to save these changes. So if I go to clear the viewer, for example, we would say no to do we want to save the pending zones? We would say no. Our goal in this video was to show you how you can use page records and zoned page records in SUPERText 7, and to hopefully give you some ideas of how you can use these types of data in SUPERText 7 not only for redactions but for other analytical purposes. Thank you very much for watching.